I've always had a goal to hit 1,000 likes on a video, but you legends smashed past that and got one of my videos to over 2K likes. Let's break even more records on this video. Please smash that like button. And I want to try this one thing. I want to know who my devoted listeners are. So once you've done that, comment down below that you hit that like button hard, or even a kind message. Let's see who our loyal devoted viewers are. You know who you are. Once again, thank you guys so much. Now to these amazing stories.
I never expected a coffee date to turn into a full-blown identity nightmare. It started out so normal, a Saturday afternoon in the little artsy district of town, the sidewalks lined with murals and indie shops. I spotted Chalisa outside the cafe, hair catching the sun like she was glowing from the inside out. We grabbed iced lattes and wandered down a block toward a vinyl store, laughing about finding some obscure music that neither of us had actually heard before. By the third date, my head was already spinning with daydreams of us at concerts and weekend road trips. Then she vanished. At first, I chalked up the radio silence to her being busy or maybe needing space. I texted a casual, "Hope you're well," and waited, but hours turned into days and the text sat unread. I felt that sinking pit in my stomach, the one you get when something's off, but you don't want to believe it. Then the call started. The first voicemail was clipped and urgent, a woman identifying herself as a manager at a high-end apartment complex 3 cities away. She said I'd missed rent payments and had until the end of the day to clear the balance or face legal action. I replayed the message twice, convinced I was mishearing. My current lease was under control, rent paid online every month with no issues. But this was a new address I'd never seen, a name that was very clearly mine. Panic kicked in. I pulled up my credit report on my phone and stared at all the new entries. Luxury leases in different states, car payments for a sleek sedan I'd never driven, and worst of all, a massive purchase order. 1,000 pairs of white Air Force Ones. My style leaned more toward thrifting tees and worn-in sneakers. Never had I splurged on anything close to $1,000 of fresh kicks. It felt like someone had exploded my identity into a series of phony credit profiles, each one more outrageous than the last. Heart pounding, I called every bureau to file fraud alerts and freeze my credit. Then I remembered the driver's license I'd left in her glove compartment when she gave me a ride home after that third date. I shrugged it off in the moment, figured it would be there the next time she gave me a lift. I never thought she'd use it against me. But seeing my own photo on these fake applications made it starkly real. She'd taken that tangible piece of me and built a whole parallel life around it. I spent the rest of the afternoon in a haze, bouncing between lawyers, the police station, and my landlord's office to clarify my actual address. Every form I filled out felt like penning a crime scene report for my own life. I kept replaying our date in my head, the way she laughed at my jokes, how she brushed a stray hair behind her ear. It felt like evidence of a con, but I couldn't quite piece together her motive. Was it just the thrill of deception, or something bigger? Once the initial shock wore off, I started retracing her digital trail. I dug through old text chains, social media follows, and tagged photos. There were gaps, ghosted messages, accounts that suddenly vanished. I even found a burner email she used to confirm those apartment applications. It was painstaking. Every late-night call to the fraud hotline chipped away at my nerves. There was a sick irony in calling strangers to fix problems I hadn't caused, essentially reminding faceless companies that yes, I was real and someone else was pretending to be me. Eventually, I got a call back from one of the apartment managers. She sounded sympathetic but firm. Leases signed. Keys handed over, months of unpaid rent stacking up. I asked if there was any way to trace who actually showed up to pick up the keys or move in. She said security footage might exist, but legal steps would be needed to access it. I booked another appointment with an attorney, wondering if I'd really have to subpoena surveillance tapes just to prove I wasn't living in 5 different condos across the country. That night, I sat on my couch, scanning pictures of sneaker hauls on Instagram, people flexing $1,000 shoe collections. It hit me that someone was out there rocking those white Air Force Ones with little idea they were purchased on stolen credit. I felt violated in a way I'd never felt before, as though my name was a mask someone else wore to get all the perks while leaving me to deal with the fallout. I realized trust isn't just about personal relationships. It's tied up in every document we sign, every account we open. The next morning, I made a list of everything I needed to do. Contact car dealerships, check DMV records, update my license, patch up credit lines, follow up with police. It was like being trapped in a bureaucratic maze with no exit. I took breaks by binge watching old sitcom episodes, anything to give my mind a rest. Yet every time I relaxed, the unease crept back in, reminding me that identity can be ripped away in a heartbeat. Weeks passed in this blur. I managed to clear most of the apartment leases once the courts recognized the fraud. The car payments got reversed after the dealership found no record of me test driving that Sen. My credit score took a hit but eventually rebounded after heaps of paperwork proved the claims were false. Still, every time I ordered something online or signed into a new app, I flinched. My own name felt like clay someone else could shape at will. Oddly, the strangest comfort came when I realized I wasn't alone in this. I joined an online forum for identity theft victims. People sharing horror stories about fraudsters using driver's licenses, social security numbers, even biometric data. My story about the 1,000 white sneakers became a sort of cautionary legend there. People commiserated and offered tips on extra security measures, two-factor authentication, locked mailboxes, identity monitoring services. It helped to hear others say, "You're not overreacting. This really happens." A couple of months after it all started, I got a message from Shalisa's burner address. It was curt. Apologies. I needed the money. It was supposed to be temporary, and a request that I drop all legal actions. I stared at it for a long time, thumb hovering over delete. In the end, I forwarded it to my attorney and didn't respond. Part of me wanted answers. Why pick such an elaborate scheme? Why disappear completely? But another part knew I didn't need to hear her excuses to move on. Today, my credit's solid, my bank accounts are safe, and I renewed my driver's license with extra security features. I still can't believe how close I came to owning apartments I never set foot in or collecting racks of shoes I never wore. The whole ordeal taught me that trust isn't just an abstract feeling. It's a contract written in ink and pixels. I walk through the city streets now with my new license in my wallet, a reminder that sometimes the people you let in closest can be the ones who steal you blind. And I'll never leave my ID behind again. I never thought a weekend escape would feel like stepping into someone else's life, but that's exactly how it started. I met him one Friday evening in the parking lot of my favorite dive bar, under strings of yellow bulbs that made everything glow. He leaned against an old Jeep, grin wide, claiming he just finalized his divorce that morning. The way he said finally made it sound like he'd been waiting forever for freedom. I didn't question it, mostly because I was tired of complicated exes and messy breakups. It felt good to imagine someone fresh and unburdened. We piled into his Jeep with nothing but backpacks and energy drinks, heading north toward the mountains. The roads climbed through pines so tall they brushed the clouds, and I felt light enough to float away from every bad memory. He played classic rock on the radio, windows down, wind whipping hair everywhere. He cracked jokes about camping disasters and promised s'mores by a roaring fire. By the time we reached the cabin, a rickety wooden place perched deep in the woods, I was already picturing lazy mornings with him making coffee, afternoons exploring hidden trails. That first evening, we roasted hot dogs over the fire pit behind the cabin. He built the fire like he'd done it 100 times, snapping sticks into place, coaxing sparks with a single match. I thought I saw relief in his eyes, like this trip was a release valve for him too. We laughed out ghost stories and passed around a flashlight, daring each other to peek into the inky forest. When darkness pressed in, we retreated inside, the cabin lit by one flickering lantern. He said he'd be back in 15 minutes with more firewood. When he came back, he asked if I wanted to share the queen-sized bed instead of sleeping on the pull-out couch. I said yes, even though it felt fast, it felt easy. Morning came too soon. I awoke to the smell of bacon sizzling and birds thrumming at the window. He'd made breakfast pancakes and scrambled eggs like he'd been practicing. He smiled when he saw me at the table, hands stretched out with a plate of food. Day 2, he said, as if we were co-conspirators on a secret mission. We spent the day hiking to a hidden waterfall, slipping on mossy rocks and daring each other to swim in the freezing pool. His laugh echoed off the cliffs, and I caught myself thinking how simple and sweet all of this was. That night, we cooked chili in an old Dutch oven and sipped cheap red wine out of mugs. Shadows danced on the walls as he talked about his life as a freelance graphic designer, how he loved the unpredictability of it. He said his divorce process had dragged on for 2 years, and that by now all he wanted was to find someone real. I believed him. It was only when the air turned cold and I wrapped myself in a blanket that I noticed his phone buzzing relentlessly. Dozens of messages from a contact saved as home. I assumed it was friends checking in, maybe work notifications. He silenced it and shoved it under the table. The third morning, I woke before him and stepped outside, lungs full of crisp mountain air. That's when I heard the kids. 4 small voices shouting, the clatter of shoes on the porch steps. I thought maybe a hiking group had arrived or the cabin owners were doing maintenance. I wandered around back and saw them, 4 children, wide-eyed and tearful, clutching backpacks, trailing behind a woman whose face was streaked with mascara. The woman called his name, her voice cracking. He stumbled out, wearing only sweatpants and a puzzled frown. His wife. The kids hung back, hugging her legs and crying. My chest locked up. I stood there, mouth open, a plate of cold pancakes forgotten in the kitchen. He turned bright red, reached for her arm, but she twisted away and stepped forward, yelling. I heard snippets. How could you do this again? This isn't the first time. He's been doing this since 2018. My head spun. She hauled him into the cabin, leaving me rooted in the yard. I picked my way to the porch, heart hammering. Their voices floated out, her crying, his excuses, and muffled sobs from the kids. I realized he'd told me he was divorced to keep me from asking questions. He hadn't finalized anything. His wife and 4 kids had driven 3 hours to find him. And they weren't alone. She pulled out a photo on her phone of another woman and 2 men, faces circled in red. He did this to them too, she said, voice trembling. He said he was divorced. He told the same lies. I backed away and slipped into the car, hands shaking as I fumbled for my keys. I heard him pounding behind me, pleading for a chance to explain, but I locked the doors. The kids pressed their faces against the windows, looking terrified. I threw the car into gear and floored it down the gravel drive without looking back. The Jeep stayed behind, silent as a grave marker. On the drive home, I felt hollow, like someone had scooped out my chest and left an empty shell. My phone buzzed, missed calls from unknown numbers, texts like, "Where are you?" and "Please pick up." I ignored them. I needed space to think. I pulled off at a diner just outside town, ordered coffee so strong I could feel it burn down to my toes. I stared out the window at the highway and tried to piece together what had happened. It was like scrolling through a corrupted file. Every time I thought I found a clue, it vanished. He'd shown me photos of his dog, promised he'd give me the keys to his apartment back in the city, had even talked about moving in together next month. None of it was real. He built a story so detailed I never saw it crumble until his own wife arrived. That night I lay in my own bed, staring at the ceiling and replaying his laughter. I couldn't decide if I was angry at him or at myself for never asking about the ring on his finger, at the missing mention of custody arrangements, at the ease with which I assumed everything was as he said. I remembered small signs, calls he took outside, vague references to the kids that never made sense, but it was easier to believe what I wanted. The next morning I deleted his number. I threw away the postcard he sent me from the trailhead and scraped his scribbled lines from my notebook. I blocked his email. It felt good to cut ties, even though it hurt to admit I'd been played, not once but repeatedly. I realized he'd done this before, built trust, broken hearts, then moved on. Women and men, anyone who'd given the time. A repeat offender of romance. By the end of the week, I told a couple of friends what happened. They listened, eyes wide, then handed me jugs of ice cream and told me to binge reality shows until I laughed again. I did. And sometimes when I'm out with friends, I catch myself scanning the crowd for someone new, someone honest, someone untangled from such messy webs. I haven't given up, but I'm more careful. I learned that a person's past can be a mirage, a story built to lure you in. And when that mirage vanishes in a cloud of tears and angry shouting, you're left wondering what was real in the first place. I thought my Friday nights in the city had finally settled into something fun when she sent me that invite. It was August, just past midnight, and the glow of neon bars was still painting the sidewalk outside my apartment. I had been swiping through apps, juggling the usual small talk boredom until she popped up, a name with that soft age edge and a profile full of bright photos. When she asked if I wanted to grab drinks at an underground lounge I'd never heard of, something in her message clicked. It felt fresh, like stepping off a crowded train into an empty station. I met her outside a black unmarked door in an alley off Main Street. The bouncer didn't check IDs. He just nodded and waved me through. Inside, the walls were painted deep plum, lanterns hung low, and jazz music dripped from hidden speakers. Habiba looked even better in person. Bold eyes, that slight curve of a smile, carrying a drink that glowed faintly green. We settled into a corner booth, the kind made for conspirators rather than awkward strangers, and I felt instant relief that she'd chosen somewhere exclusive. She laughed easily, asking about my day, my work. Every question felt tailored, like a custom fit for my insecurities and aspirations. We talked through 2 rounds of cocktails, the kind that slide down like silk and whisper your worries away. I told her about my photography side hustle and my dream of one day shooting magazine covers. She leaned in, listening like I was unveiling a secret masterpiece. When I mentioned my apartment hunt, she rattled off neighborhoods and told me which landlords were cool with pets. It was impressive, considering she worked in finance, as her bio had claimed. By the end of the night, I felt like I'd found a collaborator in life, someone who saw the best in me and knew where to find it. A week later, she invited me to her place for dinner. Her text was casual. Come over Friday. I make a killer risotto. I pictured a cozy kitchen, soft music, maybe candles. When I rang her buzzer, I wasn't surprised she lived in the Arts District, a renovated loft with exposed brick and skylights. She opened the door holding 2 glasses of white wine and a wooden cutting board stacked with cheese and olives. She motioned for me to kick off my shoes and get comfortable. I did, sinking into her plush rug as she set down the wine and ushered me toward the stove. The risotto was everything she promised, rich, creamy, perfectly cooked. We ate the island counter while she described her job working with a nonprofit that funded educational programs in underprivileged communities. It sounded noble, and I believed every word. There was warmth between us, the kind you only get when you think someone genuinely cares. When dinner was done, she poured more wine and suggested a movie. I nodded, not wanting the night to end. A few nights later, she suggested we video chat. I was impressed she wanted to keep in touch even when I was traveling for work. We laughed at each other's bad Wi-Fi moments, compared playlists, and she showed me her apartment's mezzanine bedroom. I thought it sweet when she adjusted a painting on the wall so I could see better. What I didn't realize was that little tilt was coordinating camera angles. The weekend I flew to Chicago for a friend's wedding, I noticed my phone battery draining faster than usual. When I plugged it in back in my hotel room, I got a notification that a large video file had been uploaded to an obscure cloud service. I tapped it, curious. What loaded was footage of me walking through her apartment, sitting at her kitchen counter, checking messages on my phone, even stretching my arms overhead as if I'd just woken up. My stomach twisted. That couldn't have been me. It had to be some glitch. By the time I flew home, I was jittery. I stashed my luggage in the car and headed to a coffee shop to clear my head. There I Googled the URL from the cloud notification. It redirected me to a private portal asking for entry credentials. Next, I poked around the browser history on my own laptop, only to find dozens of unfamiliar sites, directories of videos, paywalls, user forums with coded file names. The names corresponded to dates and numbers. I realized they were recordings of all my dates. My first thought was denial. There had to be an explanation. Perhaps it was some hacker prank, not her. I went back to the apartment she described so lovingly. The building's lobby was empty, buzzing elevator doors slid shut at my approach. On the 3rd floor I knocked, no answer. The hallway smelled faintly of bleach. I pressed my ear to her door and heard nothing. That's when I noticed the small witness panel, a half-moon glass embedded near the top. I peered through and saw a dark, empty living room, a floor lamp knocked to one side, wires trailing from the ceiling like fallen vines. The sofa was dusty, cushions askew. All the vibrant life she painted vanished. I found a slightly ajar closet door at the end of the hall. Inside were shelves lined with hard drives, lots of them, packed next to camera lenses and mics. A stepladder stood beneath a ceiling fixture. That's when it clicked. The wine glasses, the painting adjustment, even the vintage camera on her shelf. It was all staged. Every casual move, every bit of trust I'd given her had been bait. I grabbed out one of the drives and ran. Back in my apartment, I plugged it in my desktop and braced myself. Files named in cryptic code unveiled hours of footage. Men of different ages, all wearing casual clothes, all looking right where the camera was hidden. The videos showed them talking, laughing, even complaining about her taste in clothing. View counts ticked by thousands. Comments scrolled beneath, praising her real content and mocking what the men were wearing, what they ate, how they moved. It was some twisted marketplace where dudes paid to watch private outings with real people so they could judge them in real time. I spent that night tossing ideas. Confront her, go to the police, delete everything. But they had IP logs, payment records, a whole network. Who would even believe a private party site existed for judging random dates? It sounded insane. I knew I had to protect my footage, but I also didn't want to fold under this mess. I copied the drive onto 2 USB sticks, encrypted them, then erased the originals. I changed every password I had, enabled two-factor authentication, and for good measure I registered my personal domain so no one else could claim it. A week later I saw her profile pop up again on an app I never even used. I stared at her photos for a long time. Everything from her apartment to her job was a facade. She built a brand around tricking people, filming them for cash. My trust had been her product. I swiped left and closed the app without a second thought. Since then, I kept my dates in the daylight. Coffee shops, busy restaurants, public parks, places where I know no hidden lens can spy on me. I still wonder how many guys she's recorded, how much profit she's raked in, and how easily someone might believe her next story about nonprofit work or underground lounges. The worst part is knowing that a casual night out can be a filmed audition for some anonymous audience behind their screens, judging every word and movement. Now I meet someone new only when I feel safe enough to turn off my phone, tuck it in my pocket, and enjoy the night without feeling watched. The view of the city skyline was unreal, neon flickering off the glass of our table as dusk turned the sky a deep indigo. He wore a crisp shirt that fit perfectly, sleeves rolled up just enough to show off a subtle bracelet. He spoke about his work in finance with a casual confidence, and every time he smiled I felt like I was part of some secret he was letting me into. I'd never felt so seen. The first few dates were wild in the best way. He whisked me off to hidden speakeasies, arranged surprise tickets to underground comedy shows, and always managed to pick out my favorite late-night snacks without asking. I started really looking forward to Wednesdays when he'd text me midday asking if I was free that evening. It felt thrilling, like I was his once-in-a-blue-moon treat. I used to joke that he was my personal concierge, making life feel like a never-ending weekend. On our fourth date, we had dinner at a candlelit bistro by the river. His attention was razor sharp, leaning in every time I talked, hanging on every word. I felt magnetic. Then I noticed his phone buzz, and he slid it under the table with a quick apology. Later, when the waiter came by, he used the phone screen as a coaster before stashing it back in his pocket. I didn't say anything, I figured it was work. But after that night, I started catching glimpses. His thumb tapping out replies under the table, his eyes darting away from mine towards something hidden in his lap. The next time I slept over at his apartment, I left my phone on the coffee table and wandered into his kitchen for water. When I passed the couch, I saw his phone's lock screen light up. He swiped it open and his posture shifted, like someone who switches from actor to stagehand in an instant. I froze, heart pounding. He was staring at a series of prompts on the screen, questions like, what's the best way to compliment his jacket? And steer the convo toward his hobbies. It looked like a cheat sheet. I pretended I hadn't seen anything and grabbed a glass, trying not to shake while he peeled off the top of a water bottle. I wondered if this was a one-off or if every moment with him was being guided by some invisible director. Adrenaline buzzed through my veins. I wanted to demand answers, but also felt a weird pull to know more. Later that night, I stayed over. At 3 in the morning, I woke up thirsty and shuffled to the kitchen. On the counter sat his phone unlocked. My pulse hammered as I picked it up. The chat window was open. On one side was a message from client 2 saying she was at dinner with someone new. On the other was his live coaching, tips like mention the R on the walls and laugh softly here. I scrolled further and found logs. Dozens of sessions with different women, timestamps matching our dates. It wasn't just a hobby. It was his side gig. I dropped the phone back on the counter, my mind racing. Every compliment, every smooth turn in conversation, every little surprise he planned felt hollow now. It wasn't him at all. It was a script he'd tailored in real time for someone else while pretending to live it with me. I felt sick to my stomach. Over the next few days, I confronted my own thoughts more than I confronted him. I replayed every shared laugh, every intimate detail I thought we'd bonded over. All of it was stolen from someone else's dating checklist. I remembered how he mirrored my posture, touched his chin when I did, always knew exactly what to say to make my cheeks flush. It wasn't genuine. It was calculated. I decided to catch him in the act. I reopened his messaging app and swapped out my contact name for Client 3. Then I made a reservation at an Italian place with low lighting and soft violin music, one of those spots he'd mentioned he coached clients to pick. That night, I showed up in a green dress I knew he liked. When he greeted me at the door, I hugged him without waiting for his script and whispered, "I'm here." His smile faltered. I saw the flinch in his eyes like I'd pushed him off a tightrope. At the table, he pulled out his phone and started tapping. I looked at the screen, his notes loaded with bullet points on how to handle Client 3. I let it sit there like a live grenade ticking on the table. He tried to pretend nothing was wrong, pointed to a wine recommendation, and began reciting a bit of spat-out charm I knew wasn't his own. I interrupted him with a simple question about why he was texting while we were dining. His face went pale, and I could almost hear the gears grinding as he struggled to switch off. He stammered about work deadlines, about a friend in a jam needing advice. I watched him, sipping a glass of red that tasted like betrayal. The waiter came by and dropped off our meals, and for a moment the world felt normal again, silverware clinking, the hum of soft music, the glow of candles. But that normal was shattered by the phone lit up between us. I picked it up and scrolled through the coaching logs. His fingers twitched as he watched me. I realized this was more than a creepy hobby. He was making a business out of it, ghostwriting charm and delivering it live. He was the unseen puppeteer in every new couple's story, and I was just another puppet. I told him to leave. I didn't yell. I didn't plead. I simply said I couldn't stay because I was tired of living someone else's script. He looked at me as if I'd asked him to burn down his livelihood. He left the phone and walked out into the night, shoes clicking on the pavement as I watched from the window. In the days that followed, I erased every trace. I deleted our photos, unfollowed him on all platforms, changed my passwords. I read articles about emotional manipulation and dating scams, trying to understand how someone could weaponize conversation like that. My friends told me I should have seen it sooner, but I realized we all want to believe in something genuine, even when it's a lie. It's been months now. I still catch my phone buzz and check it reflexively, hoping for a text that never comes. Sometimes I rehearse conversations in my head, but this time they're all me speaking to myself, no coaching needed. I met someone else recently at a book club. I kept my phone in my bag, face down, and let the silence between words feel natural. It was strange at first not having a script to fall back on, but also kind of freeing. I still go back to that rooftop bar on occasion, ordering the same cocktail he once recommended. I look out the city lights and think about how easy it is to disguise yourself behind a phone. Now I watch more closely. Who's listening? Who's speaking? Who's paying attention to the pauses? Conversation isn't a performance, but it can be weaponized into one. I learned that the hard way. Now, all I want is words that feel like they come from someone's real voice, not someone else's typing fingers. I never thought I'd find myself sipping overpriced cocktails in a bar 2 blocks from the Pentagon, but there I was, blinking under the neon glow as I waited for her to show up. The place was a curious mashup. Framed war posters hung next to black and white photos of old jazz musicians, and the bartenders wore ties with little fighter jets embroidered on them. I've been told she worked in cybersecurity, whatever that meant, and for some reason I believed it. When Zara finally slid onto the bar stool beside me, her smile was easy, like she'd been doing this 100 times before. She ordered a martini with a twist, not dirty, not too shaken, just precise enough to set the tone. I went with the beer, trying to keep things casual. We did small talk about weekend plans and favorite travel spots, but by the time our first round arrived, I felt something in the air shift. She leaned forward, voice low, and said, I only date guys with high security clearance. I laughed, thinking it was a joke, but her gaze was serious. It's how I do research, she added, tracing the rim of her glass. I gather intel and sell it to the right buyers. My heart jolted like I'd been slapped. I stared at her, my throat suddenly dry. This was no pickup line. This was a confession. She shrugged and took a sip of her drink, watching me over the glass. It felt like a movie transition, that moment when the camera pulls back and you realize you've been in the wrong scene all along. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. Why would you tell me that? She smiled, just enough to be charming. Because you seem like someone interesting. And I like to be honest. Honest. The word hit me like a knock at the door, except I didn't want to answer. The rest of the night was a blur of her asking about my job. Defense contracting, small firm, barely a blip on the radar, and me giving vague answers. She nodded thoughtfully, eyes bright, as if she were collecting puzzle pieces. When I tried to shift topics, she steered us right back to the technical details. Encryption protocols, secure networks, chain of command. I realized she'd done her homework. Every question fit together into a bigger picture she was building in real time. We parted ways outside with an awkward hug. I walked home on autopilot, replaying the confession like a broken record. I only date guys with high security clearance. The words echoed in my head. I lived a quiet life, worked nights by fluorescent lights, coded firewalls to keep secrets hidden. Now someone was using me as a source, like a human USB drive. Sleep didn't come easy. I kept imagining her slipping through my apartment, copying files from my laptop, selling classified documents to who knows who. I checked my phone for hacks, canned logs, changed passwords. None of it made me feel safer. My clearance was supposed to be a badge of trust. With Zara, it felt like bait. The next week I kept running into her on dating apps. She popped up under different handles, always with that same easy smile and a promise of genuine conversation. I found myself swiping right again out of curiosity, maybe even a little thrill. We met for brunch one Sunday at a cafe near the river. She wore a simple sundress and talked about weekend hikes. No mention of intel gathering. I almost believed it. Halfway through avocado toast, she excused herself to take a phone call. I watched her pace by the window, phone held tight. I thought about slipping out and then her coming back, but something kept me there. Maybe the spark her honesty had ignited or my own fascination with danger. She returned and laughed as if nothing had happened. I smiled back, pretending I hadn't seen the seriousness flash across her face. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, trying to sort fact from fiction. I checked my credit report, my bank accounts, my project logs. No immediate breaches showed up, but that only made it scarier. She was the kind of person who left no trace like a ghost in a system. Over the next few weeks, we fell into a routine. Drinks at swanky lounges, late night walks along the waterfront, art gallery openings hacked with corporate types in suits. She asked about my latest assignments, casually nudging me to share details. I held back, tossing her half-truths. But every time I slipped, I saw her eyes light up like I'd handed her a golden key. One evening, she invited me to her apartment for dinner. The place was an open loft, minimalist and spotless, with a view of the city lights. There were no personal photos, just a few scattered tech magazines and a sleek laptop on the coffee table. She cooked lemon chicken and asparagus, plating everything with precision. We ate by candlelight on the floor, and I felt a strange intimacy in the simplicity. After dinner, she poured us glasses of wine and sat down across from me. "Can I ask you something important?" she said. My heart thudded. I nodded. She leaned in and whispered, "What's your next security clearance review date?" The question was direct, no circling around it. She pulled out her phone and typed something under the table. I realized then that I was an asset in her little intelligence operation. Every detail she extracted, every crumb of data, would be sold to someone willing to pay. I felt a wave of anger and something tighter, embarrassment, for letting it get this far. I stood up, wine sloshing in a glass. "I should go," I said. She frowned as if I canceled on her last friend in the world. Outside, the night air was cool, the city lights buzzing. I replayed the dinner scene, her calm questions, her polite smile, the way she'd taken notes on her phone. Everything had been a setup. I dialed my boss's number and left a voicemail out wanting to transfer projects. Then I checked my clearance status one last time before deleting her contact. A few days later, I heard through the office grapevine that there'd been minor information leaks. Nothing catastrophic, just enough that a few contractors got flagged for review. I wondered if Zora's intel had made its way into circulation. I cleaned my desk, packed my bags for a weekend trip, and tried to shrug it off. On the train out of town, I caught myself glancing at every seat, half expecting her to be there, notebook in hand. I thought about how easy it is to turn trust into currency. My clearance, once a symbol of reliability, had made me pray. I closed my eyes and leaned against the window, watching the fields blur past. For the first time in months, I felt a spark of relief in the distance, a promise that I could still control what I shared next. I never imagined that agreeing to a simple come over and watch a movie text would turn into the weirdest evening of my life. It was a Friday night, and I was bored out of my mind. I had already rewatched that crime drama twice. When Ling Ling pinged me with a thumbs up emoji and said my place, I figured why not. His apartment was supposed to be a chill spot in the arts district, full of plants and soft light. Perfect vibe for a low-key hang. I arrived with a six-pack and some leftover pizza, and he greeted me like I was his best friend. The living room smelled like incense and eucalyptus, and the couch looked cushy enough to nap on. He motioned toward a small table stacked with DVDs, everything from classic thrillers to cheesy rom-coms. I picked out a horror flick since it was Friday the 13th, and we settled in. There were blankets everywhere, as if he expected me to stay late. I thought it was sweet. Halfway through the movie, I noticed a photo frame on a shelf. It held a picture of him with a group of friends at a beach barbecue. That seemed normal until I realized I'd never met any of these friends. The names scrawled on the back were vague. College crew, work buds, summer trip. I made a mental note but shrugged it off. We passed the popcorn and talked about nothing in particular. Weekend plans, favorite artists, if pineapple on pizza was a crime. When the credits rolled, he suggested we grab snacks from his kitchen. I followed him down a narrow hallway, the glow from the living room fading behind us. That's when I saw it, a wall covered edge to edge with photos, each one of a different woman. They were pinned with little color-coded stickers, blue, red, yellow. Next to each photo was a post-it note listing routines, jobs, sometimes even addresses. My breath caught. It looked like an obsessive project, like someone mapping out prey. He caught me staring and offered me a soda. I took it, feeling weird. I asked about the wall casually, tipping my head toward it. He laughed nervously and said it was his art installation, a concept piece on modern relationships. I nodded till my gut twisted. The notes read like surveillance logs. One girl's Tuesdays at the coffee shop, another's morning runs by the river, a third's shift at a bookstore downtown. He'd been tracking them for months. I tried to play it off, but the air felt thick. He bounced on his toes, shifting from one foot to the other like he was ready to bolt. I sipped my soda, trying to figure out how to leave without making a scene. The logical part of my brain screamed, "Get out now," but I stayed frozen, waiting for him to explain. Instead, he launched into a pitch about how data shapes our social fabric, how following routines reveals the stories people don't tell. He grabbed a marker and started circling photos, drawing arrows linking jobs to habits. My heart pounded as I watched scribbles form across the wall. Connections between barista at Luna Cafe and evening yoga class, freelance writer and book club at main library. It was like reading someone's private diary without permission. I backed toward the living room, stalling for words. Everything felt surreal, incense swirling, his voice echoing, the photo wall looming behind him like a confession. I realized then that he wasn't some artsy statistician. He was a pattern tracker, collecting personal details on women he'd met online. I pictured my own face among those snapshots, marked with a bright yellow dot and a note reading weekend bike rides. My chest tightened. I set the soda on a coaster and forced myself to speak. I thanked him for the movie night but said I needed to head out. He looked startled, like I just canceled his entire worldview. He mumbled something about finishing his exhibit and asked if I understood art. I smiled, said I loved art, but I really had to go. I walked back down the hallway, every step echoing. The living room felt empty now, the DVDs stacked like forgotten ambitions. I grabbed my jacket and keys off a hook by the door and paused at the entrance. He was in the kitchen, clearing dishes but watching me over his shoulder. I nodded, turned the knob, and left without a backward glance. Outside, the street was quiet, a soft breeze rustling leaves. I texted a friend a single word, creep. No response yet, but I didn't need one. I walked until the city lights blurred into a comforting glow until I felt steady again. Later that night, I changed all my passwords and deleted the dating app we met on. Part of me worried he'd logged everything. Phone numbers, usernames, maybe even my address. I called the building manager to ask about any unusual visitors and put a lock on my mailbox. Every notification ping set my pulse racing, but no one replied except my friends telling me to chill. By the next week, I was back to a normal routine, coffee runs, work emails, lazy Netflix nights. But I made a pact, no more blind invites to unknown apartments. I stick to public places now, where if someone gets weird, I can slip out unnoticed. I still think about that wall, how we cataloged every move like we were inventory items. It taught me that sometimes the people who seem the most relaxed have their own secret lab hidden behind closed doors. Every so often I pass by that arts district building. I look out the windows as if I might catch a glimpse of him peering out, photos in hand. But it's always just an empty hallway, echoes of incense long gone. I keep walking head high, knowing I dodged someone who thought my life was a data point, and I won't let anyone treat me like one again. I couldn't believe my luck when I matched with her on that app. Her profile said she was free weekdays before 3 p.m., which sounded perfect for someone like me who worked afternoons and weekends. No weekend drama, no late night bar crawls, just mellow lunch dates and early afternoons catching up over coffee. When she suggested we meet at that Sunlit Cafe near the river at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday, I thought it was fate. The way her text dropped into my feed was always precise, almost businesslike, but I like knowing we have a solid hour and a half before either of us had to dash off. The first date felt like a breath of fresh air. She wore a flowy sundress and carried a leather satchel that looked like it held all of her essentials. We sat by a window where sunlight streamed in, painting our hair gold. We talked about books, podcasts, and weekend bucket lists. Every so often, her watch buzzed, and she'd glance at it without breaking eye contact, as if she were timing a secret experiment. When the clock hit 3 p.m., she stood up with a friendly smile and said she had to get back to something important. I nodded and waved goodbye, assuming she had an early meeting or some job obligation I wasn't curious enough to ask about. Our second date was at a tiny bookstore cafe on Thursday. I arrived to find her already seated with a cappuccino and a stack of graphic novels. She beamed as I sat down, like I was the extra ingredient that completed her recipe. We browsed shelves, comparing favorite authors and laughing about ridiculous book covers. At 2:45 p.m., she tapped her watch and apologized for the short time. She said her afternoon was packed, but promised next time we could try a longer date. I thought that sounded reasonable. Maybe she had kids or weird family commitments. I never imagined the truth. By the third week, I was texting her less about when to meet and more about what to do. I suggested a picnic in the park, a visit to the flower market, even an art exhibit. She agreed every time, always with the caveat that it had to end before 3 p.m. Something in me brushed off the odd schedule. I mean, who wants to date on weekends anyway? I enjoyed the midday sun and the idea of sneaking away from my own work to see her. I started scheduling my mornings and early afternoons around our dates, shifting deadlines, and grabbing quick takeout from the corner deli. One Tuesday, I arrived at the cafe 15 minutes early and spotted her at a back table staring at her phone with a worried expression. When I waved, she smiled but didn't move. I sat down across from her, coffee steaming between us, and asked if everything was okay. She took a deep breath and said she'd lost track of time again. Her face went serious, and I noticed she seemed twitchy, like every glance at the clock cost her a small headache. When her watch buzzed, she looked relieved as though she'd been liberated. I reached out to hold her hand, but she gently pulled away, saying she had to run. That was when I first felt the spark of suspicion. I decided to follow up later with casual questions. I asked what job required someone to be gone by 3 p.m. sharp, and she said it was confidential. She laughed it off, claiming it was boring HR stuff. That only made me more curious. Instead of confronting her, I started piecing together clues. My friend works at a high school 2 towns over, and one afternoon I asked vaguely if she ever heard of a teacher named Nina who always disappeared at 3 p.m. My friend's eyes went wide. She described a math teacher who took medical recertification breaks every afternoon, slipping out of class around that exact time. It hit me all at once. The weird schedule, the urgency in her texts, the way she looked at her watch like it could betray her. The next time we met, I lowered my voice and asked if she was a teacher. She stiffened and said it wasn't relevant. I pressed a little, mentioning that I didn't mind out of work hours or weird job quirks. Her face flickered between annoyance and panic, and then she blurted out that she did work at a high school, yes, but that nobody could ever know. She had tenure, she said, and if word got out she was sneaking off for dates during school hours, she could lose everything. She begged me not to tell anyone and explained that she scheduled every class so she could slip out on her own after the kids did standardized tests. That was her important afternoon every day. I sat back and felt a mix of relief and frustration. I liked her, but I didn't want to be a secret or a scandal. I asked what she did for those tests, and she described corralling restless seventh graders into a silent hallway with math problems taped to the walls. Every day at 2:50 p.m. she'd slip out, dash across the parking lot, and meet me at the cafe. After 3 p.m. she'd sprint back, ditching the Lotta Cup and racing past students who wondered where their teacher had gone. As she talked, I pictured her dodging halls and tight corners, sneaking past the principal's office with heart pounding. It all made sense now. I told her I appreciated her honesty, but I felt uneasy being part of her secret routine. I offered to take her somewhere closer to the school, somewhere she could slip out without sprinting across town. She looked at me like I'd suggested we move to another planet. She said the cafe near the river was the only safe spot. No cameras, no students, no staff. I sighed and leaned across the table. I said I was fine with it, but that I wanted to know the truth whenever she disappeared. She nodded, relief washing over her features. From that day on, I set my calendar around her 3 p.m. escape. I'd sneakily text her reminders 5 minutes before we had to wrap up, and she'd shoot back a running emoji. I'd learned to cherish those stolen hours, the warm breeze in our walks, the hush in our voices when anyone else might overhear. It felt illicit, like a stolen chapter of a book. I loved watching her relax once she traded her lesson plans for my jokes. One afternoon, I brought her a little present, a portable phone charger and a note that said, "Because you deserve a smoother getaway." She hugged me like I'd given her the world. I told her next time we could try meeting at a bakery across the street from her school, so she wouldn't have to dash so far. She squeezed my hand and laughed and then shook her head. "This is our time," she said. "Let's not mess with it." My friends tease me now about my lunchtime romance. They ask if I carry a helmet for her sprint back or a GPS tracker. I just laugh and shrug, saying I love the thrill and all. Weekdays before 3 p.m. are my favorite time slot, and I wouldn't trade it for endless weekend brunches. Every date ends with her speeding off, and every aftertaste is sweetness. Coffee cups half empty, midday sun hitting our faces, and the quiet buzz of knowing we found something secret and entirely ours. I've been looking forward to Friday night all week, the kind of excitement you get when you scored a surprise upgrade on a flight or found front row tickets to a sold-out show. Rach, who I met on Tinder, suggested we meet at a rooftop garden bar downtown, an impossible green oasis above the honking taxis and neon signs. When I arrived, lanterns hung from trellised vines, and the air smelled faintly of jasmine. He greeted me with that easy smile, who I'd come to trust over our 2 weeks of texting, and led me to a candlelit table draped in cream linen. We ordered Thai basil cocktails and shared a plate of spicy edamame while the city glowed below us. He asked about my work, graphic design freelance stuff, and listened so intently I almost forgot about the cosmos overhead. He reached across the table when I mentioned my dog and told me how much he loved animals. He joked about getting me a puppy one day. I laughed, picturing myself tripping over tiny paws in my tiny apartment. He had that rare ability to make me believe the wildest ideas could actually happen. Halfway through our pad thai, he paused, his fork hovering in midair. He set it down slowly and said, "I want to tell you something important." I felt the temperature drop a degree or two, like the world had slipped a gear. He folded his hands and took a breath. "I've been testing you," he said. My mind blanked. I stared at him, trying to process how a person could sound so calm after admitting something so strange. He smiled like he was sharing a punchline to a joke I hadn't heard. He explained that in his community, trust was the ultimate currency. He said he practiced this trustworthiness test on new acquaintances to see who was honest, who kept confidences, who showed up on time. He spoke of respect, loyalty, and the deep bonds between people who never lied to each other. I nodded, trying to follow his logic. Everything felt surreal, like I was watching myself in a movie scene that didn't quite belong in a dating story. I remember the slight tremble in my hand as I picked up my glass. He leaned forward, eyes gentle, and said, "If you pass, I'll introduce you to my family." My pulse spiked. I thought he meant parents or siblings, maybe his closest cousins. Instead, he explained that he had 3 wives, and that this test determined if someone could handle that kind of relationship. He said it wasn't about jealousy or competition, but about building a tribe of people united by trust. My cheeks burned, half with embarrassment, half with anger. He went on describing how the arrangement worked: separate households, shared family dinners, rotating commitments, financial teamwork. He spoke of the logistics: vacations planned months in advance, the way birthdays and anniversaries were juggled like a complex puzzle. To him, it sounded romantic, an experiment in community living and collective care. But to me, it felt like a contract I'd never signed, a script I hadn't agreed to follow. I set down my partially eaten pad thai and realized the vines around us seemed to close in. The lanterns flickered. Below, the city hummed, oblivious to the dinner table where I was being offered membership in something that sounded like a cult. I pictured myself trapped in shifting schedules, divided love, awkward introductions. I felt caught between politeness and panic, between wanting to stand up and yelling and not wanting to make a scene on this beautiful terrace. Raksh reached out, brushing a stray hair from my face. "I wouldn't ask if I didn't truly believe you belonged," he said quietly. His words were sincere, but sincerity didn't make it less strange. I glanced at other tables, friends laughing, couples leaning in, someone clinking glasses. My own date felt like an out-of-body experience. I tried to find an anchor in his eyes, but all I saw was unwavering confidence in a plan he mapped out long before he met me. I exhaled and asked how the test worked exactly. He said it was based on 3 things: honesty about intentions, willingness to honor commitments, and respect for all members of his circle. I'd shown up on time. I'd been open about my past. I'd never canceled at the last minute. According to him, I'd passed. He said, "You're someone I can trust with my whole life." My stomach turned. I realized trust didn't have to be earned this way, and I didn't owe him anything. I stood, pulling my chair back. He looked surprised, eyebrows lifting. I said I needed air and walked to the edge of the terrace. The breeze felt good against my face, a reminder that I could still choose my own path. Below me, traffic lights switched from red to green in steady cycles. I took a deep breath and turned around. He was gathering his things, voice calm as if this were just another possible outcome of his test. I walked back to the table and collected my purse. He stood 2, arms open, expecting some embrace or agreement. But I closed the distance and said, "I appreciate honesty, but this isn't for me." He nodded, polite as ever, and told me he respected my decision. I walked away, stepping carefully past lantern-lit planters, past couples lost in each other's eyes. Behind me, he called out, "You'll always be someone I trust," and I didn't look back. As I descended the stairs, I thought about what trust really meant. To me, it meant feeling safe, feeling like I could say no and still be respected. I felt that safe now in my own shoes, on the concrete sidewalk under street lamps. I hailed a cab, watched the rooftop garden fade into the night, and felt strangely free. The city felt bigger, more open, and I knew that no test, no matter how sweetly presented, could ever define my boundaries. Trust worth having was the kind you gave yourself first. I'd never thought a coffee date could turn into a public roast, but that's exactly how my evening with her unfolded. I'd matched with Jen on a weekend afternoon when my inbox was reset to 0, and I was feeling optimistic. Her profile was sparse. No selfies in exotic locales, no quote about living life to the fullest. Just a single photo of her silhouette against the sunset and a brief line that said, "Ask me anything." I liked the mystery, so I messaged her about the best hidden coffee spot in town. She replied with directions, no small talk, and an emoji that looked like a cat winking. I took it as a challenge. We met at a tiny cafe crammed between a record store and a vintage bike shop. The place smelled like roasted beans and old wood floors. I arrived early, scanning the room for someone who might fit that shadowy photo, maybe a pixie cut or a crooked grin. When she walked in, I recognized her instantly. Tall, dark hair pulled into a messy bun, oversized glasses that made her eyes look enormous. She waved at me, slipped onto the stool across from my table, and held out her hand. I shook it, confident we hit it off. Conversation kicked off smoothly. She asked about my job. I asked about her, "Ask me anything, promise." She smiled but deflected, saying she preferred real-life mysteries. We talked about our favorite songs streaming in the background, traded book recommendations, and joked about people who leave reviews for toothbrushes. She laughed easily, eyes flicking toward my coffee cup to see if I was actually drinking it or just posing. When I offered to buy her a second round, she shook her head and said she'd bring her own refillable mug next time. I admire the commitment. After an hour, she glanced at her phone, a quick check, then slipped it into her jacket pocket. I didn't think much of it until I saw her hand hover over it, almost guarding it. When I mentioned a new bakery down the street, she asked if I wanted to walk for a bit. We strolled past shop windows, the afternoon sun warm on our backs. I felt like we were building something real, something unfiltered until I got home. My phone buzzed that night with notifications, missed calls from friends, and a stream of direct messages containing a link to a TikTok video titled "Our Date Last Night." I tapped it, assuming it was some joking reenactment. Instead, there she was standing in a brightly lit room, filming herself with a high-quality phone camera. The video cut to clips of me sipping coffee, leaning back in my chair, fiddling with my watch. Then came her commentary, sharp, sarcastic, running over my every move. She mocked the way I chewed pastry, joked about my nervy laugh when I talked about graphic design, and even made fun of the half-empty coffee cup I left on the table. Her tone was playful but merciless, and the caption read, "Rate your dates live for my viewers." I stared at the screen, feeling my skin crawl. The video had thousands of views and hundreds of comments. Some viewers applauded her bravery, others laughed and shared their own dating disasters. I watched her critique my posture as if I were auditioning for a comedy sketch. It didn't feel like harmless fun. It felt like betrayal broadcast to the world. My phone buzzed again, my mother texting me if everything was okay. I typed back, "You'll see." The worst part was the edits. She'd spliced in footage of me scrolling through my phone when she wasn't looking, and a slow-motion close-up of my half-smile when I thought we'd connected. She narrated over it. "Notice how he glances at his screen every 2 minutes. Classic red flag." My heart pounded. I realized she must have recorded me without my knowledge, edited the footage overnight, and uploaded it before I'd even gone to sleep. I spent hours refreshing the video page, hoping it would disappear. Instead, it climbed into the hundreds of thousands of views. She pinned a follow-up comment that said, "Next date live at 6 p.m. Who's in?" I felt like a character in a reality show I never auditioned for. My friends called, some furious on my behalf, others curious to know what I did to deserve a live roast. I couldn't even bring myself to explain. Every word sounded like justification. The next day I tried to move on. I went to work, told my coworkers I was fighting a nasty bug and couldn't talk about it. I deleted the video app from my phone, changed my privacy settings on every account, and blocked her everywhere I could. Yet every time I saw my reflection on the screen, I remembered her voice mocking my choice of jacket or the way I fiddled with my keys. I wondered how many other unsuspecting dates she'd filmed, how many had laughed along while their faces ended up in her highlight reel. I debated confronting her, sending a message demanding she take the video down, but worried she'd consider it a publicity stunt and air out even more footage. "Watch him beg," she might say. I didn't want to feed the beast. Instead, I called my best friend and asked if we could meet up at that bakery we talked about. I needed something tangible, a fresh croissant warm tea, instead of the cold glow of my phone. My friend listened as I explained through gritted teeth that I had been unwittingly live-streamed and ridiculed online. He suggested I make my own video, a counter-narrative, reclaim my own story. I considered it, but I hated the idea of feeding the algorithm. Then he said, "Why not just write about it? Write it all down, get it out of your head." That sounded better than another round of screens and clicks. So here I am, writing this at the same cafe where I met her. I ordered a plain black coffee, no frills, no half-empty cups, and I'm drafting these words into a journal. It feels good to press pen to paper. I still check online to see if she's uploaded more clips. So far, she hasn't. Maybe the excitement wore off. Maybe her followers moved on to the next viral target. I hope so. I deleted her messages, unfollowed mutual friends, and moved on to a new profile on that dating app. This time I added a note. "Please don't film me. I doubt anyone will take it seriously, but at least I tried." The real lesson isn't about technology or privacy settings. It's about remembering that real connections happen when the cameras are off. I spent weeks replaying every minute of that date, convincing myself I did something wrong. Now I know that I didn't. I was just someone who showed up in good faith and got turned into a punchline. No more. From here on out, I'll keep my face out of other people's highlight reels. If someone wants to rate me, they'll have to do it in person. No cameras allowed. I still get that flutter in my stomach whenever I walk into a co-working space, even though I've sworn off dating apps forever. But when I saw him there, leaning over a MacBook Pro at one of those communal high-top tables, I thought, why not? He looked like every pitch-perfect entrepreneur cliche. Crisp white shirt, rolled sleeves, a backpack that hinted at last-minute flights. He smiled and our eyes met and gestured for me to join him. It felt spontaneous in the best possible way, like destiny sneaking through the fluorescent lights and caffeinated chatter. We chatted about everything, our favorite podcasts, why remote work was overrated, the best ramen spots nearby. He told me about his startup, something about streamlining the freelance economy. His vision was huge, his conviction contagious. By the end of our cappuccinos, I felt like I'd found someone who saw the world the way I did, full of potential waiting to be hacked. He asked if I'd like to join him that weekend for a casual brainstorming session at his loft. I agreed without hesitation, eager to dive into something new. His loft was a sunlit warehouse conversion, exposed brick and Edison bulbs, meeting tables pressed into corners like art installations. He introduced me to 3 other women, also drawn in by his charm, each clutching a laptop and a coffee cup. He explained that he was bootstrapping a platform to connect creatives and clients directly, bypassing agencies that take huge cuts. He said he needed testers and content creators to build early momentum. In exchange, we'd get equity and first crack at paid gigs once they launched. It sounded fair, like a co-op where everyone wins if the ship stays afloat. We worked from dawn until the afternoon, researching competitors, drafting copy, even mocking up landing pages. He hovered over us, asking questions, offering guidance, praising our insights. I left with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in months. That night, I drafted a marketing plan and emailed it to him at 11:30. He replied at midnight with glowing remarks and suggestions for edits. I went to bed convinced I'd stumbled into my dream side hustle. The following week, he scheduled more collaboration sessions. They always started with free snacks and coffee, then slid into intense group work, data analysis, customer interviews, social media outreach. I found myself spending entire evenings in that loft, watching the sun dip behind the skyline as I tweaked user surveys or coordinated Slack channels. Our little team of volunteers felt like a startup family. He called us founding partners and encouraged us to think big, to invite friends to sign up as beta users. We complied, sending out links and collecting names. 2 weeks in, I noticed everyone trading stories about late invoices, or rather the lack of invoices. We'd all assumed that once the platform launched, our sweat equity would convert into actual shares or cash. But no one had seen a contract or an official offer letter. When I asked him directly, he said that paperwork was in legal review and that for now it was important to keep building buzz. He promised that the equity details would arrive by month's end. A month turned into 2. Our group had grown, more eager faces crowded those long tables, all chasing a piece of the same pie. He'd host weekend hackathons, feed us pizza, and pat us on the back when we landed user testimonials. I loved that sense of camaraderie. At night, I'd scroll through our Slack history, feeling proud of every emoji reaction and every milestone we hit. Then, one Monday morning, I woke up to a Slack channel labeled Announcements. There was a single message: "We're pivoting, new direction. Check your email." My inbox had nothing from him. I refreshed 15 times, hoping I was missing something. Nothing. I floated into the loft that afternoon anyway, figuring he'd pop in any moment. Instead, I found a new group of volunteers setting up laptops. They eyed me politely but kept their distance. I asked them what was going on. They shrugged and said they'd just signed up that morning. My phone pinged with a text from one of the original women. "Did you get ghosted too?" We met later at a coffee shop and admitted we'd all been dropped without warning. He'd shut off the original Slack, left us without any updates, and moved on to recruiting fresh faces. I called and texted him. No reply. I checked his social profiles. He'd scrubbed mentions of the project and updated his bio to serial innovator. The website we built was offline, domain available for purchase. I felt hollow, like I devoted hours of my life to a mirage. All those evenings spent chasing vision boards, and brand strategy felt wasted. Worst, I'd bragged about the project to friends, asked them to give feedback, even shared preliminary designs on my social media. My professional network now had screenshots of a defunct idea attributed to me. I sat in my apartment replaying every brainstorming session, every time I nodded at his promises. Over the next few days, I reached out to everyone involved. Some were angry, some were embarrassed, Others were relieved they hadn't sunk any real cash into it. We shared screenshots of Slack threads, drafts of business proposals, and the countless emoticon-laden feedback documents. We pieced together what little structure he'd left. Links to defunct Google Docs, half-finished wireframes, a spreadsheet tracking potential investor contacts that ended abruptly at row 27. We tried calling him, emailing him, even DMing him on social media. His number went straight to voicemail, his email bounced, his accounts vanished or went private. It was like he'd slipped out of our lives the same way he slipped into them, effortlessly, with a perfect exit strategy. I realized he'd been treating us like free labor, promising future payment that never existed. He recruited us through dating apps, collecting our trust before ghosting us in a corporate version of Tinder fade. Eventually, I deleted all the project-related files from my cloud storage, but kept a folder marked warning. Don't trust that I shared with friends in creative circles. I wrote a cautionary post on LinkedIn, detailing the red flags, unpaid promises, lack of legal paperwork, sudden pivots without notice. It felt good to warn others, but it didn't bring back those dozens of hours I'd invested. Now when I hear about someone's hot new startup idea, I'm instinctively skeptical. I ask for a contract before I commit my time, demand clear deliverables, and insist on small paid milestones. I still love collaborating on creative projects, but I've learned that passion needs a paycheck or at least a written agreement. My heart still flutters when I walk into a co-working space, hoping to meet someone who shares my vision. But these days I carry a notebook labeled Contracts First, a reminder that even the best-looking pitches can be built on empty promises. I really pictured myself stepping off a private plane, but that's exactly how I landed in his world. It was a weird morning when I matched with this guy on the app, and by Sunday evening I found myself squeezed into the back of a glossy Rolls-Royce, sunroof open, wind whipping my hair into a wild halo. He flashed me a grin that said, "Welcome to luxury," and I believed it. After months of curbside coffee dates and budget-friendly dinners, this felt like stepping onto a movie set. We drove through tree-lined streets toward a downtown penthouse he claimed he'd just closed on. I watched skyscrapers flicker past, imagining how I tell my friends about being a real estate tycoon. When we pulled up to a glass tower, his phone buzzed with a confirmation code for building access. He handed me the sleek keycard and led me into a lobby that felt more like a five-star hotel. Valets in crisp uniforms whisked our ride away, and an elevator whisked us skyward, mirrored walls reflecting our anticipation. His penthouse was every bit as stunning as he hinted. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed a panoramic view of the river, and a grand piano sat beside a patch of marble tile that caught the morning sun. He poured us champagne from a crystal bottle, the bubbles dancing in fluted glasses as he toasted to new beginnings. He spoke about market trends and property flips with such authority I almost believed he owned half the city. I leaned into every word, picturing a future full of rooftop parties and exclusive investor lunches. We spent the afternoon touring what he called his portfolio of condos and lofts. Each place was staged with plush furniture, fresh flowers, and artfully arranged throw pillows. He dropped lines like, "Imagine this as our getaway," or "This one would be perfect for you." I giggled like a schoolgirl, swept up in the fantasy of moving from my tiny studio into these sprawling showrooms. When he opened a balcony door and pointed to a neighboring high-rise with identical design, he said, "I've closed on that too." I nodded along, convinced this was real. Dinner that night was at a rooftop restaurant he said was under his ownership. We sipped neatly crafted cocktails, the kind with edible flowers floating on top, while he described upcoming developments and potential joint ventures. Every dish seemed custom-made for us: scallops on edible petals, artist foam cappuccino, a decadent chocolate sphere that melted at a tap. Around us, couples and business types toasted glasses of champagne, and I felt like I'd been handed the keys to an exclusive club. After dessert, he suggested a nightcap at his second residence. I pictured another penthouse, maybe a countryside manor with views stretching forever. Instead, we piled back into the Rolls, which I thought he kept on standby. The car slipped through quiet streets and pulled up at a modest Airbnb with a simple doormat and no valet in sight. He ducked his head, fiddling with his phone as he swiped the host app. He tapped a few buttons, and the door clicked open. I realized that I was about to step into someone else's home. Inside, the Airbnb was clean but generic white sheets, plain art prints, a small kitchenette. The place smelled faintly of lemon cleaner. He led me to the couch and pulled out 2 travel-sized bottles of champagne from a paper bag. I tried to keep smiling as I asked about the shift. He laughed and said he rented this spot for the weekend while he moved into a different property. He said the penthouse was dusty now, being staged for new buyers, so he needed a temporary spot. I nodded, but my stomach twisted. I glanced at the bedside in the corner and saw a stack of folded towels with the Airbnb host's logo still intact. A dusty welcome guide lay on the coffee table, listing checkout protocols and local coffee shops. Suddenly the fantasy unraveled. I pictured a roster of test drive cars, each swapped in and out as needed. I imagined Airbnb bookings he never canceled. It felt like stepping behind a theatrical curtain and finding cardboard props. I washed down the cheap bubbly with a glass of water and asked how he actually managed to afford everything. He sighed, looking sheepish. He admitted he didn't own any of it, that the Rolls was a dealership test drive, the penthouse was a showing appointment in progress, and the restaurant belonged to a friend who let him use it for photos. As for the Airbnb, his mom picked up the tab for every weekend getaway, believing he needed time off after stressful work weeks. He said he'd never intended to deceive me, that it started as a game of one-upmanship and spun out of control. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He kept talking, apologizing, promising to make it up. I looked out at the couch, 5 steps away from a clean bed I wasn't invited to use. I realized I was just another bit of his performance. In a way, I admired the lengths he'd gone to, booking cars, staging apartments, selling a story so convincing he nearly had me believing my own role in it. I gathered my purse and stood. He reached for my hand, eyes pleading. "Can we just go back to who we were before the show started?" he asked. I nodded slowly, but I didn't take his hand. I walked to the front door and slipped out into the hallway, the door clicking shut behind me. I didn't look back at the penthouse keycard he swiped on the reader. Outside, the night air was crisp and felt real. I took a deep breath, tucking my hair behind my ear. I hailed a cab to head home, pulling out my phone to call a friend and laugh about the absurdity. The city lights blurred past as I tried to piece together how someone could rent an identity as easily as a car. I felt cheated, yes, but also oddly impressed by his ambition. The cab driver asked if I had a story I wanted to unpack. I told him I had an adventure of sorts, one that taught me even the glossiest surface can hide an empty shell. I watched neon signs pass overhead and realized I was glad to be back in my own life, where rent was predictable and cars weren't on loan. When I got home, I slipped out of my heels and sank into my couch, flipping on a sitcom that was real only because it was scripted with paid actors. That night, I deleted his number and uninstalled the dating app. I kept the memory of champagne and skylines, but tossed out the rest. In the end, I realized I traded the rush of luxury for the comfort of authenticity. And honestly, it felt like the best upgrade I'd ever made. So basically, I thought I found a shortcut to true love when I matched with her under that sweltering July sun. Her first message was simple: let's do something real. I'd just come off a streak of half-hearted coffee dates and bar crawls, so I was game for whatever real meant. She suggested a Sunday afternoon barbecue at her family's place. I pictured burgers, beer, and casual backyard banter, exactly the kind of low-pressure hang I needed. I said yes before I even checked my calendar. When I rolled up to her driveway, my car bounced over a gravel lane framed by tall maples. I followed her waving hand toward a sprawling lawn dotted with picnic tables, folding chairs, and a giant sprinkler spraying kids in neon swim trunks. She was wearing a sundress with bright flowers and the kind of smile that made you feel like everything was on the up and up. She introduced herself with a quick hug and led me toward a circle of laughing aunts and uncles. Her mom was manning the grill, Dad was tinkering with a Bluetooth speaker, and behind them I saw her ex sitting at a faded picnic table with a cooler of beer and their 2 kids clustered by his legs. When she called me over and clasped my hand in hers, introducing me as her boyfriend, my pulse hammered like I just stepped into some strange rom-com. I managed to stammer out a "nice to meet you all," while her ex watched with a tight smile. The kids stared at me like I was a new toy. I realized then this wasn't just a family barbecue. It was a stage, and I'd stumbled into someone else's drama. We circled back to the grill, and I grabbed a paper plate piled high with hot dogs and coleslaw. She squeezed my arm and whispered, "Watch this." I turned back to see her ex stand, puff his chest out, and stride toward us with two little kids trailing behind. His face was stern, like he was auditioning for a showdown. My heart sank. This felt less like lighthearted jealousy and more like a powder keg. Before I could say anything, he reached me, nodded curtly, and said, "Mind if I talk to her for a second?" I tried to smile and step aside, but he cut me off mid-move and grabbed my shoulder. He pulled me to the side where I could hear his voice low and shaky. "It's over. You're not going to mess this up." I opened my mouth to explain, but he squeezed harder, like he felt threatened. It was surreal. Kid gloves or no, he was a head taller and built like he ran those tractor tires I'd seen in the garage. Aunt Margaret shouted that the burgers were ready, and my would-be girlfriend turned and hollered back, "Save it for later." The kids began to tug on their dad, half pulling him away. His face shifted from anger to embarrassment, and for a second I thought maybe this would blow over. Instead, he threw his elbow back, swung it wide, and gave me a great chop right on the shoulder. The stun of impact sent a hot zing through my arm. People gasped. Some staged a yelp like they were at a theater show. I looked for a silent camera crew. Before I could steady myself, he jerked my belt loop from behind and yanked down my shorts so fast I felt my boxers swirl around my knees. The entire family, kids, grandparents, cousins, erupted into whoops and hoots. My face went scarlet. I pulled my shorts up while one of the kids giggled and pointed. My girlfriend rushed over, cheeks flushed, and slapped her ex on the arm, scolding him in half furious, half laughing tones. She told him he was acting like a child, and he rolled his eyes like he'd just performed a neat parlor trick. As I tugged my shorts back to normal, I realized I was wobbling on two emotions, pure humiliation and a strange, bubbling anger. The leftover cheer in the air felt like static after a fireworks show. My girlfriend grabbed my hand and marched me toward a folding chair. She plopped down beside me, muttering how sorry she was, how he always did these stunts. I tried to brush it off. "No big deal," I said, though my voice shook. I picked at my coleslaw while she went back to revive the conversation with her aunt about salad recipes. The ex stalked back to his spot, flipping a beer bottle cap like he was proud of himself. The kids glared at me before turning back to their pops, making small talk about bubble wands and the sprinkler. I realized the whole thing had been a show for the kids, teaching them lessons about property and territory, maybe. It dawned on me how I'd been used as a prop in a passive-aggressive lesson. My girlfriend kept glancing at me as if waiting for applause, but all I wanted was a timeout. After a while, the heat of embarrassment cooled into a simmering resentment. I looked at the half-eaten spread. Corn on the cob, potato salad, ribs glazed with sauce. It was all normal summer stuff, but every bite felt laced with absurdity now. I tried to relax, took a swig of lemonade, and forced a laugh at the kid's cartoonish reenactment of my pants-down moment. My girlfriend sat close, whispering apologies and excuses. "He's like this. He just wants attention. I swear he's always trying to make me jealous." Her words felt hollow, like offering me a bandage made of tissue paper. When the sun dipped lower, she suggested we head back to her car so she could change. I nodded, desperate to escape before the ex decided on round two. She led me through the crowd, still holding onto my hand like undoing was impossible. I felt the stares, heard the occasional cough or muffled snicker. By the time we reached the driveway, I was sweating for a different reason than the July humidity. She leaned against my car, huffing out a breath. "Really sorry," she said again, eyes wide with sincerity. "I didn't plan any of that." I looked at her, summer light catching on her hair, her lush apology almost working on me. But I knew apologies after public humiliation weren't enough. I realized this was the kind of drama that never stops. They'd both feed off me, until someone got hurt for real. I nodded and said I had to get home, checked my shirt for grass stains, and adjusted my collar. In the rearview mirror, I saw her silhouette against the house lights, still pretty but now part of a household circus. I pulled onto the street, rolling down my window for cool air, and exhaled hard. The street was quiet, the grill smoke drifting into the dusk. I turned on the radio, blasted the volume, and drove away. That night, I replayed the scene in my head, her ex's laugh, the kids' cheers, her hand fumbling to steady mine. I realized I'd been reckless stepping into someone else's family feud. It wasn't about me, it was about their unresolved issues. I told myself I wouldn't mistake drama for romantic excitement again. My next date would be somewhere with no exes, no kids, no crowds. Just two awkward people trying to figure each other out. Maybe a library or a board game cafe, where the only thing that might pull a prank is a sneaky thumb under the table. Humiliation can be a powerful teacher. Mine taught me that some stories use you as a mere plot device. After that day, I swore off being anyone's prop in their emotional theater. I parked my car in my garage, flicked off the light, and let the silence in my own space wash over me. Romance, I decided, is meant to be calm, not chaotic. And if it ever turns into a public stunt again, I'll walk away before the first punch is thrown. I thought I'd finally broken my streak when I matched with him on a Tuesday morning. Just another swipe in a sea of faces. But his grin was genuine and his profile said he loved weekend road trips and homemade pizza. We talked all afternoon, sending photos of our pets and telling funny stories about our worst dates. By the time he suggested meeting up that Friday, I was actually looking forward to it. No ghosting, no weird vibes. Just a fresh start. Our date was set for 6 at a laid-back pizza joint downtown. I arrived early and snagged a corner booth where I could watch the entrance. He walked in on the dot, carrying an extra helmet for my scooter. I thought that was sweet, like he planned ahead. He waved, ordered us a margarita and a side of garlic knots, and we slipped into easy conversation about our favorite toppings and childhood cartoons. He told me he worked in a freelance sometimes and was as single as they come. I believed him. It felt like we were clicking. When the waiter brought our drinks, he reached out and touched my hand. Eyes warm like he was sharing a secret. I leaned in, my heart doing that quick little flip. We chatted until my phone buzzed. It was my roommate, asking if I'd seen the baby seat I had picked up from the shop this afternoon. I texted back, yeah, thinking she'd already put it somewhere. I slipped my phone back in my pocket and shrugged. I thought nothing of it. After pizza, we decided to walk to a nearby park. The air was cool, the streetlights casting golden circles on the pavement. He offered me his jacket and I shivered, which I accepted without hesitation. We strolled past the fountain, talking about dream vacations. Him to the mountains, me to the beach. It was as cliche as dating could get, but for once it felt genuine. Then I noticed it, a baby car seat tucked in the back of his car, visible through the rear window. It caught the streetlight just so, making the leather look soft and worn. I blinked and looked again, thinking maybe it belonged to a friend. I stopped walking and pointed. He followed my finger and froze. His face went pale. Oh, he said in voice tight. That's for my fiancée. She's in labor right now. He cleared his throat and leaned against the car. She called earlier and told me to bring it for the hospital transfer. My stomach dropped. I looked at the car seat, clean but obviously used, the kind you buy when you're past the excitement of expecting your first child. His eyes darted away like he just realized he'd been caught on camera. I felt a cold wave of betrayal. All this talk of freedom and bachelor life, of weekend escapes and single adventures, vanished behind that child's buckle straps. I said something like, right, that came out flat. He tried to laugh it off, saying he didn't want to scare me by slipping that detail into his profile or message before our date. He said he assumed I wouldn't care. I stared at him, the jacket hanging in my hand suddenly heavy. My mind raced through every moment of the date. The helmet, the gentle banter, the cozy booth. How careful he'd been not to mention the life waiting for him somewhere else. I pictured him rushing to the hospital, half texting nurses from his phone, telling them where to find the seat. I pictured me, a footnote in the middle of a day already packed with contractions and monitors and midnight phone calls. He reached for my hand again, but I recoiled. Cold wind brushed past us. I took a breath before I spoke. I told him I appreciated the pizza and the walk, but that I couldn't compete with the life he already had on hold. He shook his head, saying he never meant to mislead me. He thought it was better to meet in person before dropping the bomb. His words felt rehearsed, like he practiced the apology in front of the mirror. I looked at the seat again as if it held the answers. It looked sturdy, safe, everything a kid needed. And there I was, a blind date, trying to decide if I wanted to be part of that picture or just walk away. I chose to walk away. I said goodnight, tucked my jacket under his arm, and started the scooter. I heard him call out an apology, but I kept moving until he was just a shadow behind me. Riding home, I tried not to let my thoughts spiral. I replayed his smile the way he said, as single as they come. I felt embarrassed for trusting him so quickly. but also angry. Angry at being deceived, and angry at him for assuming I'd be okay with half the truth. My roommate's text popped up again. "Where's the baby seat?" I typed back, "Never mind," because I didn't want to explain my detour into someone's secret life. That night, I tossed and turned, imagining his fiancée in a hospital gown, holding their newborn while he was off on a blind date. I pictured her crying out his name while he was somewhere promising me a second date. The injustice of it made my jaw ache. I reminded myself that honesty should be the easiest part of dating, but evidently some people see it as optional. By morning, I made up my mind. I'd delete his number, block him on the app, and move on. I'd text my roommate to pick up that seat. I'd leave it in the mailbox. I'd tell my friends the story over coffee, maybe even laugh about it in hindsight. But right now it was too raw. I needed a reset, something to remind me that being single means more than just being unattached on paper. It means being truthful. Later that week, I met someone else at a dog park, someone who brought his dog and a genuine smile, someone whose life was uncomplicated by secret passengers. We sat on a bench and talked about paw prints and pickup lines. No baby seats in sight. It felt refreshingly simple. I still drive past his street, sometimes seeing that baby seat through the window. I look away. I remind myself that some people juggle lives behind closed doors, and it's up to you whether to step in or quietly step out. I chose step out. And now, every time I gear up for a date, I check the back seat first, because I don't want any surprises weighing me down when I thought I was flying free. I had no idea I was signing up for a real-life soap opera. I met her in the old bookshop cafe downtown, wood-paneled walls, mismatched armchairs, the kind of place where you feel smarter just breathing the air. She had bright eyes and an easy laugh, and by the time she suggested we grab pasta at that cozy bistro around the corner, I was already imagining lazy Sunday brunches with her. Dinner went smoothly. Homemade ricotta gnocchi, red wine that warmed us from the inside, and conversation that felt like two puzzle pieces fitting perfectly together. She told me she was a children's illustrator by day and a poet by night, alternating between sketching rabbits in gardens and scribbling lines about moonlight on paper napkins. She described weekend trips to vintage fairs and thrift markets, and I pictured us exploring dusty-stalled, hunting down old typewriters. She had that kind of whirlwind charm that makes you lean in to catch every word. When our plates were cleared and the waiter refilled our glasses, I felt a spark of excitement. Maybe I'd finally found someone worth writing home about. After dessert, she paid the bill with a flourish and offered to walk me home. We strolled along lantern-lit sidewalks, crunching leaves underfoot, sharing secrets about embarrassing childhood talents and bizarre family traditions. She stopped at a corner and kissed me lightly on the cheek, promising a proper second date soon. I waved goodbye, heart still fluttering, and turned down the street toward my apartment. 2 weeks passed before we spoke again. I sent a casual text asking if she wanted to meet for coffee, but got no reply. I tried again a few days later, even left a voicemail. Silence. I figured she decided I wasn't her type, chalked it up to the unpredictability of dating. Then I saw a news alert that made my coffee cup jolt in my hand. There was a courtroom sketch of her in the local courthouse, and a headline that read, "Illustrator sues 3 former dates for emotional distress." My pulse went straight through the roof. I clicked the link and read that she'd filed separate suits against 3 men she'd dated over the last month, claiming they'd stood her up, lied about their identities, and caused her severe anxiety leading to sleepless nights. The article described her in tears as she waited for each defendant to appear. My mind hooked on that word defendant. With each clause, I felt my own pulse damping into dread. Could I be one of them? The afternoon of my court date, I sat in a faded wooden pew, the whole place smelling like old leather and varnish. She was up front at the plaintiff's table, pen in hand, her face drawn tight with determination. A thin wisp of her dark hair curled across her forehead, like she'd forgotten to fluff it after dashing in. I watched as her lawyer passed her notes, her lips moving in whispers. The bailiff called names, and when he announced mine, I nearly jolted off the bench. Standing in that hall felt surreal. Rows of benches, a faded seal on the wall, hush falling every time a footstep echoed. I walked up to the defense table, glanced at the judge's bench, and felt her eyes lock onto mine. She blinked, a flicker of surprise as if she realized I was here too. Our lawyer gave me a reassuring nod, but my throat felt dry as sand. When the session began, her lawyer spoke first, outlining each date with dates and locations, weaving threads of failed promises and ghosted calls. I winced hearing things I knew firsthand. Our gnocchi dinner and I promised to call, the coffee date that never happened. It felt like she'd penned her own script and had been cast without warning. When it was my turn, my lawyer stood and said I'd arrived. I'd apologized for the lack of follow-up messages, and I'd offered explanations. My phone had broken. I'd been traveling for work. We presented screenshots of texts where I asked to reschedule, flight receipts showing I was halfway across the country, emails with technical support confirming my call history was wiped. I didn't speak directly. I let the evidence carry my case. She watched every exhibit, her eyes narrowing. When I glanced at her, she looked distant, like she was sizing me up as a stranger rather than the woman who'd sketched rabbits and quoted poems 2 weeks ago. I thought of how effortlessly I'd opened up to her, told her about my messy apartment and my attempts to learn guitar. Now those moments felt strange, almost non-existent. Between testimonies, I caught sight of the other 2 defendants. One was a guy she dated after me, a gym trainer whose case centered on alleged misrepresented height, and another was a barista accused of never revealing a past engagement. They sat with stiff backs, filling with ties and shaking their heads, as the plaintiff's lawyer laid out her grievances. The gallery murmured, people leaning over to compare notes, as if this was primetime theater. I wondered if she saw me as just another face in her lawsuit lineup. Finally, the judge called for a break. I gathered my belongings, my hands clammy on the smooth leather of my case file. I caught her alone in the hallway, crunching her notes into a tight fist. She looked up, startled like she hadn't expected to see me outside her corner of the courtroom. For a moment our eyes met, and I half expected her to apologize, to confess she'd overreacted, to wonder if she'd been hasty. Instead she said only, "Best of luck," her voice steady but hollow. I nodded and walked past, footsteps echoing. I realized then that there was no space for shared memories in a place built for division. Our dinner, our laughs, our dreams of typewriters and thrift stores, they belonged to a different world, one she left behind the moment she filed. Later that evening, the judge delivered a tentative ruling. Enough evidence to dismiss 2 of the suits, and he asked her and the gym trainer to resolve their dispute in mediation. He gave her a gentle lecture about rushing to court before exhausting other options. She nodded, shoulders drooping as if she'd just realized her own misstep. As I left the courthouse, I felt a weight lift off my chest. I couldn't call it relief exactly, more like a muted emptiness, a sense that something fragile had shattered beyond repair. I walked under the gray sky, felt the distant hum of traffic, and thought about how easy it is to mistake hurt feelings for reasons to sue. In the end, she sued 3 strangers, lost 2 cases, and now faced mediation with another. All for dates that maybe didn't go perfectly, but weren't criminal. That night, I went to my favorite diner, ordered pancakes with extra blueberries, and filled in my phone's calendar with a reminder. Next time, ask for a second date instead of costing or rushing to court. Romance, I realized, isn't a case file to win or lose. It's a messy human thing that thrives on forgiveness and second chances. I paid my bill, left a generous tip, and stepped out into the night with 1,000 stories to tell, just none that involved courtrooms or damages for broken hearts. I'd never thought a dating app message could sound like a golden ticket, but his first ping felt like one. He called himself Colganor, said he was an art curator with a passion for antique jewels. That struck me as cool, someone into beauty, history, and stories behind things. Our first video call was late Sunday night, and he showed me his studio apartment filled with ornate sculptures and lush fabrics. He leaned into the camera, voice low and excited as he explained how he hunted down rare gems at estate sales. I was hooked by his confidence and the way his eyes lit up when he talked about forgotten treasures. We met a week later at a riverside cafe in the Arts District. The place smelled of fresh pastries and brewing coffee, with easels set up for weekend painters. He arrived carrying a small box tied with red ribbon. I unwrapped it to find a vintage silver locket. Inside a black and white photo of a woman in 1920s attire. He said it was the Koh-i-Noor locket, named after a royal gem rumored to bring prosperity to its keeper. Then he surprised me by saying he wanted me to have it just because he felt a connection. I accepted it, feeling like a princess in a fairy tale. Date 2 was at a private museum opening he'd snagged invites for. He guided me through dimly lit galleries, whispering stories about each artifact as if I was the only person he cared about in the room. He talked about how men and women of old courtships courted under candlelight and moonbeams. His fascination made me snap photos and ask questions, and I loved every minute. Afterward, we shared a bottle of red wine in a rooftop garden, overlooking city lights that seemed to shine just for us. By our third date, he'd invited me to a candlelit dinner at his place. His studio had transformed into a romantic enclave. Heavy drapes, brass candelabras, a Persian rug spread under a low table. He served me saffron risotto and grilled asparagus, explaining how each spice had a story. I felt special. I had stepped into an exclusive chapter of his life. He told me about his past relationships, how travel had taught him to value time over anything else. I nodded along, thinking I'd found someone rare and thoughtful. A few dates later, he started dropping hints about my schedule. "You work so many hours," he said one evening. "I wish I had time to see you more." I brushed it off as flirtatious concern. I was juggling evenings at the gallery and freelance design work, so I understood his worry. He suggested late afternoon walks instead, or mornings over croissants. I admired his creativity in making time for us. It felt nice to have someone consider my calendar. Then one Sunday after brunch, he said he had something important to discuss. We sat by the riverbank, and he took my hand, gazing seriously at the water. He said he felt a deep connection, like our lives were meant to intertwine. Then he leaned closer and said, "I think you deserve a life of ease, of being at home creating beauty, not glued to a desk. You should quit your job." I recoiled slightly, quit my job for him. It sounded drastic. He explained that I could move in with him, that he'd support us both with his curator income and occasional gem sales. He painted a picture of lazy mornings painting watercolor flowers together, afternoons scouring flea markets, evenings hosting intimate dinner salons. My heart thumped. On one hand, the idea of more time with him sounded dreamy. On the other hand, I felt a squeeze in my chest. Our work was my independence, my creative outlet. I said I needed to think about it. He nodded, smiled, said he understood, but left no space for half measures. "I want us fully present," he said. "I want you to be free from other obligations." He pressed a locket into my hand and kissed my forehead, as if that made everything better. I spent the next few days torn. Every time I picked up my sketchpad, I remembered his words. Every email from a client felt like a chain keeping me away from his world. I found myself looking at job listings and thinking, maybe I could find remote work. Maybe I could slow down. He texted me twice a day, asking if I'd made a decision. I felt cornered, anxious, unsure his love came with strings I couldn't untie. One night, I had dinner with my roommate and spilled the whole story. She asked why I was even considering it, why I'd give up my own dreams. Her questions cut through the rose tint of his proposal. I realized that what he was offering wasn't partnership. It was taking over. He'd subtly sapped my sense of self-worth, making me doubt my work. The locket no longer felt like a gift, but a tether. I called him to talk it out, but as soon as I said I wasn't ready to resign, his tone shifted. He sounded disappointed, confused, almost resentful. He said, "If you truly cared, you'd do this for us." I felt anger rise, anger that he'd framed my ambition as a barrier to our love. I told him I valued my career, my independence. He fell silent, and when he spoke again, it was with a cold finality. "Maybe we want different things." He hung up. The breakup was sudden, no fight, no messy argument, just a click and a void. My phone felt heavy without his messages. I visited the cafe where we met and picked up one of his remaining postcards. A silhouette of a gem-encrusted crown he'd slipped into my bag weeks ago. I pocketed it, thinking I might frame it as a reminder of what felt like starlight and what turned out to be chains. In the weeks that followed, I dived back into work. I took on new clients, painted murals on cafe walls, wore my own art on t-shirts I designed. I still wear that silver locket sometimes, not as a promise, but as a keepsake of a chapter where I learned to guard my own flame. Occasionally, I see someone browsing antiques with the same dreamy look I used to have, and I feel a pang of nostalgia. But now, when someone suggests I quit everything to chase a life made for me, I'll smile politely and say, I already chased it. It led me back to myself. The river still sparkles under the city lights. The cafe still brews the same dark roast, and I still believe in rare treasures. Only this time, the rarest treasure is owning my own story from start to finish. I thought I'd met the kindest soul on Tinder when her profile popped up under recommended. She called herself Narla, posted a selfie with a soft smile and a leg in a cast propped on a cushion. Her bio said she'd been in a bad car accident 6 months ago, healing slowly, and that she loved poetry and old movies. I swiped right immediately, drawn to her gentle energy and her honesty about a tough time. Our first text exchange felt like an instant connection. She asked about my favorite black and white film. I shared mine, and she replied with an entire paragraph about the Lady Eve that made me laugh and miss my grandmother. We set our first date for a Tuesday afternoon at a cafe near the river. When I arrived, she hobbled out on crutches wearing a cheap brace under her jeans. I offered to help her inside, and she smiled, nodding appreciatively. She described how every step still hurt, but that she didn't want to let her injury define her life. She ordered a latte and a slice of carrot cake, and we settled into a corner table. Her limp was pronounced, but she wore it with grace, shifting her weight carefully and laughing about the frustration of not dancing at a friend's wedding last month. The next few dates followed a similar pattern. We met at brunch spots, she with her booted foot extended onto a stool, me across from her pretending not to stare too hard at the uneven way she put weight on her crutches. She told me about her accident, how a distracted driver had clipped her, sending her into numerous collisions with parked cars. The scar along her shin peeking from under her jeans felt personal, like I was seeing her private battle scars. I admired her resilience. She'd been through surgeries, endless therapy, yet her spirit stayed bright. She said she'd been learning patience from a flower arranging class and wanted to try painting when she regained more mobility. As we got to know each other, I learned she worked at a publishing house part-time, proofreading manuscripts of travel memoirs. She said she lived for stories of people moving through the world despite setbacks. I found it poetic that her own body was telling a story of healing in real time. On our fifth date, we went to a book fair. She hobbled between booths, careful not to trip. She still beamed whenever an author signed a copy for her, thanking them and promising to recommend their work to her book club once she could navigate the club's high steps. One evening, she invited me for dinner at her place. When I knocked, she swung the door open with surprising ease despite her limp. She wore a flowing skirt and a blouse, the brace hidden neatly. Her apartment was cozy with books stacked like towers and houseplants on every windowsill. She guided me to the couch, then disappeared behind a door that led to her small kitchen. I heard the sizzle of olive oil, the rhythmic chop of vegetables. When she returned, she carried a plate of roasted vegetables and quinoa, explaining each ingredient's healing benefits: turmeric for inflammation, ginger for circulation, kale for protein. I nodded enthusiastically while she settled onto a low stool, wincing slightly as she bent her knee. Dinner was delicious and unhurried. The scent of basil and lemon filled the room. Afterward, she gestured toward a corner where a dusty stereo sat on a small table. She asked if I wanted to hear some flamenco music she'd been practicing with in therapy. Flamenco. My heart sank, because flamenco wasn't exactly therapy for someone who limped. She pressed play, and suddenly the room filled with frenetic guitar and crisp handclaps. She closed her eyes, shifting her crutches aside, and to my astonishment, she lifted her injured leg up from the brace and began to sway, her arms weaving through the air. Her limp vanished, replaced by a confident dancer's rhythm. I couldn't believe my eyes. I scrambled to my feet, stuttering apologies about whether she'd overdone it. She paused the track and slid back into her brace with practiced ease, apologizing for not warning me. She laughed nervously, saying therapy sometimes involved gentle movements to retrain muscles. I said it was amazing, but odd that her therapist hadn't warned me she was getting back into dancing. She nodded and changed the subject, but I felt a knot in my stomach as I sat back down. Over the next few days, I replayed that moment in my head. I wanted to trust her, but my curiosity got the better of me. I asked a mutual friend, someone from my workplace who knew her name, if Narla's injury was public knowledge. My friend frowned and said he'd only heard rumors of a minor sprain, not a serious car accident or surgeries. He'd seen her at a local open mic night, hopping up on stage to read poetry without any limp. My pulse raced as I pieced it together. The casts, the crutches, the carefully shared backstory. It all felt contrived. I confronted her gently the next time we met at a quiet bistro. I asked about her dance practice, which seemed too advanced for a few months post-accident. She grew quiet, eyes flicking away. Then she sighed and admitted she'd pulled the leg injury story out of thin air after a bad breakup. She said she thought a tragic backstory would make her more interesting, that she felt invisible unless she had a story of suffering. She bought the brace on an online auction site and used borrowed crutches. She said she regretted it, that she hadn't meant to lie forever, but that once she started, it got complicated. I felt a mix of relief and anger. I'd fallen for an act, not a person. I'd sympathized and protected her, only to find there was no one to heal. I pictured those dates as scenes in a play where she directed every move. I reminded myself of her laugh as she painted wicked smiles on my empathy. I tried to sort out my emotions: betrayal, pity, sadness. She looked down, twisting the edge of her napkin, eyes damp. I told her I appreciated her honesty, but I needed time to process her confession. She nodded, tears pooling, and slipped back into her brace. I paid the check and left with my heart pounding. Outside, the night air felt colder. I stood under a street lamp watching people pass, wishing I could unsee the performance. Over the next week, I avoided her calls and texts. My friend said I should give her a chance, that people lie sometimes to feel seen. I understood that intellectually, but emotionally I felt too wary. I kept replaying her falsetto-prone fall, the way she leaned deliberately into our conversations. I realized I had to protect my trust more carefully. A month later, I ran into her accidentally at the same book fair. She'd left the brace and crutches at home, wearing sneakers and carrying a tote bag full of signed first editions. She recognized me and waved, genuine warmth in her eyes. She looked free, natural. I crossed the aisle to meet her, and she asked if I wanted to grab coffee. I stared at her for a long moment, then shook my head and said, "I'm good." She nodded and smiled a sad thank you, then turned and walked away among the stacks. Walking home, I thought about how people invent stories to fill the spaces inside them. Narla's tragic backstory had been a mirror for her own insecurities, a way to draw attention and compassion. In the end, our real stories are what matter: the mistakes, the truths, the awkward moments of discovery. I realized that trust, like a leg recovering from injury, needs honest steps and solid ground. And so I left the braces behind, ready to walk forward on my own 2 feet, no crutches required. Our first date with Drake was casual: lunch at Taco Truck Park and a walk around the downtown street market. He was funny, relaxed, talked about his work in apps and how he liked chasing sunsets for photos. I figured our second date would be more of the same. When he picked me up Saturday afternoon, I noticed a small backpack on the passenger seat. He greeted me with a grin and handed me a map, saying we were going on a little adventure. We drove an hour out of town to a lake nestled in pine trees, the kind of place where you could hear silent ripples and crow calls. I loved the spontaneity. That's when I met her. His daughter, 7 years old, standing shyly by the water's edge, holding a bright pink life vest. He shot me a quick glance. "Hey, this is Emma. She's joining us for the day." I blinked, totally unprepared for a parent that's actually parenting on a date. Emma waved, eyes curious, then slipped her life vest on with practiced ease. She looked at me and asked in a voice as serious as a courtroom, "Are you going to call me mommy today?" My stomach flipped. I opened my mouth, closed it, tried to think of something that didn't sound awkward. He laughed and said, "Just kidding, but let's see how fast you catch on." He winked at me like this was a playful test. I forced a smile and said, "Sure, hoping to charm my way through." Emma smirked and said, "I'll check later." Then she trotted off to the dock, where a small paddle boat waited. I felt I had stepped into some weird improv class. We spent the afternoon paddling. He coached Emma on how to point the boat, and I cheered her on. She stroked the oars like she'd done it 100 times. He looked at me and said, "She loves being on the water." I nodded at trying to figure out how dating worked when kids were in the equation. At one point, I reached over to steady her paddle, and my hand brushed hers. She looked at me with wide eyes and said, "That feels nice." I swallowed, feeling warmth spread through me. After the boat ride, we wandered the picnic area. He pulled out sandwiches and chips from a cooler while Emma dashed around collecting sticks. He asked if I wanted a sandwich, then handed one to her. She munched, watched me, and whispered, "Mommy, pass the chips." My heart thudded. He chuckled and said, "You can just call her by her name." Emma pouted, then turned to me and asked if I liked games. I said I loved board games, and she brightened, asking if we could play snakes and ladders when we got home. On the drive back, I sat between them, Emma bouncing with excitement like she'd won a roller coaster ticket. He played her favorite songs, and we sang along. I caught him looking at me in the rearview mirror, eyebrows raised. I laughed, not sure if I'd passed some invisible course. When we arrived at his place, a cozy townhouse with crayons scattered in a corner, I realized it was where I was supposed to meet his world, not escape it. Inside, Emma raced to a shelf of games while he showed me the living room. Family photos lined the mantel. Emma's birth, beach vacations, birthday cakes with candles. I felt like an intruder flipping through someone else's scrapbook. He offered me coffee. I took it, trying to ignore the way my sneakers felt out of place next to her tiny slippers. We played the game. Emma insisted on calling me Mommy for the first round, and he pretended to be stern, saying she had to call me by my name until I got 3 ladders. She complied with a giggle, "Okay, Carly." I realized I'd given him my name just before we left, like a scene in a rom-com where everything's scripted. She beat me soundly and then declared me her favorite stepmom as a consolation. My cheeks burned, and he laughed, brushing a hand through his hair. Dinner time came, and he cooked mac and cheese while Emma set the table. He asked if I was okay with cheese sauce, vegetarian option, or if I preferred the vegan one he'd made. Emma watched me waiting. I said I liked anything. He winked and whispered, "She's picky with sauce textures." Emma spoke up, "Mommy, do you want extra cheese?" I nodded, and she grinned, sprinkling cheese exactly where I told her. I realized I was giving parenting directions instead of being on a date. After dinner, we cleaned up as a team. I dried dishes, he stacked plates, and I loaded the dishwasher like it was the most fun job ever. Then Emma yawned and said she was tired. He scooped her up and asked if she wanted her bedtime story. She snuggled her head on his shoulder and said, "Read me the one about the moon princess." He looked at me, raised his eyebrows, and asked if I wanted to hear it too. I nodded, feeling oddly honored. He carried her to her bedroom down the hall. The walls were painted soft gray with constellations stenciled in white. She climbed into bed with her stuffed rabbit, and he tucked her in. I followed, standing at the doorframe while he opened a book. He spoke softly, bringing the story to life with different voices. Emma's eyes drifted closed as he narrated the princess floating through stardust. I watched the way his face softened and how gently he slid her blanket up. I didn't expect a consent form before coffee, but that's how my evening with her began. It was a Wednesday when I matched with Fatima on the app. Her smile was warm, her bio witty, and she said she was working on a stand-up routine about dating disasters. I thought perfect. Someone who gets it. We agreed to meet at a cozy downtown cafe at 7 p.m. I showed up early, ordered a latte, and waited for someone funny to walk in. Fatima arrived right on time, carrying a slim folder and wearing a bright scarf. She waved, slid into the seat across from me, and said, "Hey there." I smiled, pulled out my phone to check her profile again, and noticed something peeking out of her folder, a document with typed headings. She nodded at it and said, before anything else, "I need you to sign this." I blinked and she slid the folder forward. It was a 2-page audience participation consent form. The top read, "For use in stand-up material." Below were sections outlining that the conversation could be recorded, quoted, or reenacted on stage, and that by signing I waived any claims to anonymity. She even had a witness line for her roommate. I stared at the form, my leg growing cold. She flipped the page, one eyebrow raised. I asked, "Is this a joke?" She shook her head, voice calm. "I'm serious. I record bits of my gigs. I need to make sure I have permission to use material from first dates." She tapped a checkbox labeled, "I consent to all future use of my words and demeanor and performance." The air felt thick, like I'd wandered into a legal consultation instead of a date. I laughed nervously, but she didn't join in. I took a sip of my latte and asked if she really planned to use our conversation. She said yes. She liked real interactions better than open mics. She explained that after a date, she'd look over her notes and pick the funniest parts for her next set. I realized then that this was less about stand-up and more like a research project. The contrast between her bright eyes and the dry language of the form made me feel off balance. I signed the form with a shaky hand, more curious than trusting. She slid it back and tucked it in the folder, smiling as if she'd just closed a deal. We ordered drinks and a shared slice of cheesecake. Our conversation flowed. I asked about her favorite comedians. She asked about my worst breakup stories. She took quick notes on a small pad, then scribbled her own punchlines beside them. Every so often, she'd glance up and grin, as if she'd just found a gold nugget for her act. Halfway through Cheesecake, she put her pen down and said, "Okay, now pretend I'm not recording." I raised an eyebrow. She laughed and said it was an experiment, seeing if I'd loosen up without the pressure of consent forms. I almost believed it until she pulled out a tiny voice recorder and clicked it on. She said, "Just testing." I felt the surge of irritation and amusement at once. This date was like improv comedy with hidden cameras. After dessert, she suggested a walk to a nearby park so she could capture ambience for her routine. I followed, chewing on bits of formality and cheesecake crumbs. At the park, she set the recorder on a bench and asked me to tell her about my childhood birthday disasters. I obliged, recounting the time I blew out candles early and burned the cake. She laughed, making exaggerated notes and humming segments to herself. It felt surreal, like being both the performer and the audience. We wound up on a park bench under a street lamp. She pressed record again and said, "Go off the record now." I felt a flicker of relief until she added, "Just kidding." She recorded our off-the-record chat too, explaining that some of the best material comes when people think they're not being recorded. Our shoulders tensed. I wondered how many other people she'd done this to, collecting bits of personality like souvenirs. I didn't leave until close to midnight, partly because I was curious how far this would go, partly because I was frustrated with her antics. When we got back to the cafe's empty patio, she finally turned off the recorder and said she had a 2 a.m. open mic. She invited me to come, promising a front row seat and a shout out if I recognized myself in a joke. I hesitated, then shook my head. I like comedy, but not when I was the lab rat. She shrugged, still smiling, and packed up her folder. I stood to walk her to her car. She balanced the consent form and recorder in one hand, key fob in the other. I asked if she ever worried about people feeling exposed. She said she valued authenticity, that real humor was born from honesty and vulnerability. Yet here she was tick-boxing all of it first with legalese. I slipped the recorder and folder into her passenger seat, thanked her for a memorable night, and said goodnight. She waved as I walked away, voice echoing, "See you at the open mic, if you dare." I didn't look back. Instead, I texted a friend to grab drinks tomorrow and left the encounter behind me. In the days after, I found myself typing out bits of our conversation, replaying my stories in my head. A week later, I spotted her social media post. Next gig, real stories from real first dates. Shout out to the guy who blew out candles too soon. My stomach twisted. I watched the video clip she shared, my voice narrating the cake disaster. Face blurred almost unrecognizably, but still mine. The crowd laughed. She smiled into the mic and said, "Thanks to my brave volunteer." I realized that consent forms can feel neat on paper, but in practice they let someone mine your life for laughs. I left a comment, "Funny set, but maybe get consent after the show." She replied with a wink emoji, "Part of the act." I rolled my eyes and clicked away. Now, whenever someone invites me to be part of the show, I check if there's a hidden line to sign. I still love stand-up, but I don't want my life to be raw material. Authenticity means mutual respect, not legal waivers over coffee. My next date is booked at a cooking class. No forms, no hidden recorders, just flour on our hands and conversation that stays between us. That feels like the real performance I'm ready for. I thought finding someone who insists on picking up the tab was a welcome change, especially after dates where I ended up splitting a pizza and calculating tax and tip on my phone. So when Luke showed up for our first dinner at a cozy gastropub and said, "Let me take care of this," I felt oddly relieved. He handed his card to the server with a confident nod, no debate, the way someone buys morning coffee. We ordered 2 small plates and a cocktail flight, laughing over jalapeno hush puppies and talking about our favorite podcasts. Luke asked about my job in marketing and listened like he was mentally bookmarking every detail. When the bill came, he reached for it without hesitation. I offered my card, but he waved me off with a grin and said, "We're partners, right?" It felt thoughtful, like he valued shared experiences over petty math. Our second date was brunch on a sunny Saturday. He insisted on covering my avocado toast and latte, along with his eggs Benedict. I felt guilty at first. I believed in equality, but he made a show of Venmoing me immediately afterwards for my share. The notification pinged, /$15.50. I raised an eyebrow and he said, chokingly, half the brunch fund. I paid with another ping and thought that was the end of it. By our third date, I realized paying for everything was part of Luke's style. We went to a new sushi spot downtown, ordered an omakase tasting, and he covered every roll with ease. I started expecting the seamless payment until his phone buzzed in my coat pocket. Out of curiosity, I checked the notification. A Venmo request from Luke. The breakdown: sushi $80, nigiri $20, shared sake $25, service charge $15, tip $12.50. Total $152.50. Half was $76.25. The request for your half. Thanks. My heart sank. I stared at the screen. He must have split everything down to the cent. I flipped my phone around to show him, and he said, "Pay me when you can, just keeping our finances tidy." I laughed it off, masking the sting. It felt like the end of spontaneity, turning generosity into an IOU ledger. A few days later, he texted to plan our fourth date, a road trip to a nearby vineyard. I agreed because I liked carefree weekends. He picked me up in his car, full tank, and mapped road. We spent the day on wine tastings and a picnic under grapevines. When he filled the tank on the way home, I thought, great, we're covered. But hours later, I got another Venmo request. Half of fuel $30, tolls $5, parking $12, picnic cheese board $18, water $6. Our share from today, he wrote. I stared at the breakdown like it was a final exam I hadn't prepared for. Every expense, down to the bottle opener rental, was in that message. I felt like a freelancer having her invoices itemized by a meticulous client. I paid, my stomach twisting. It occurred to me that he saw dates as transactions rather than shared adventures. At first, I tried to make light of it, joking about Venmo Valentine. He laughed, but kept splitting costs. He'd send requests after coffee runs, movie tickets, even 2 breakdowns for the same dinner when I went to the restroom. I began expecting a request whenever I got into his car or sat down with a menu. The magic faded, replaced by that buzzing ledger. On our next date, an outdoor concert, I arrived armed with cash, thinking maybe paying in bills would stop the itemizing. After the show, over greasy fries and lemonade, he reached for the check and paid. I slid him a 20 when he put his card away. He frowned slightly and said, "Venmo is better." He pulled out his phone, typed in an amount for half the fries and lemonade plus 20% tip, and asked me to send it. My 20 felt heavy in my pocket. I realized then that Luke wasn't being generous. He was monetizing every moment. His "I've got this" was always followed by a detailed invoice. He masked split expenses as fairness, but it felt calculated. The charm of being treated was replaced by the anxiety of watching my phone. I wondered if I could trust his kindness or if it was just a business model in disguise. I decided to confront him on our next date, a casual dinner at a taco truck park. Under string lights and vinyl-covered tables, I pulled him aside and said I appreciated not having to fuss over the check, but that splitting costs so precisely made me uncomfortable. He looked surprised, like I'd questioned his moral compass. He said, "I just want things to be clear, no confusion on who owes what." I told him clarity was one thing. It felt like a cold spreadsheet was guiding us. He paused, then reached for my hand. His voice softened, and he admitted he'd come from a background where money was tight and every cent mattered. He said splitting everything equally made him feel secure. I understood, but told him that relationships needed room for spontaneity and occasional generosity without an IOU. He nodded and promised to stop the itemized requests. That night, instead of sending a Venmo request, he surprised me by picking up 2 churros and offering them without fuss. I smiled, sweaty sugar on my lips, as he shared the sticks with me. It felt good to let my guard down. After that, he paid without asking for reimbursements. I paid sometimes, and sometimes he did. We found a balance between generosity and fairness. Dates felt like moments, not mini accounting sessions. The lingering question of who owes what finally dissolved, leaving room for laughter and joy again. I still remember those itemized requests, the way they buzzed like tiny alarms. They taught me that generosity can backfire when disguised as strict fairness. Now, when someone says "my treat," I smile and say thank you instead of reaching for my wallet. And when I open Venmo, I look for messages from friends, not unexpected invoices.